PowerPoint presentation sort of outlining their content area. The students and their faculty are encouraged to really articulate the role of the student in the program, and so that's what makes this so great. So we had over 40 submissions, as you could see. We ended up accepting 6 for oral presentations, and then 10 for the poster presentations, which run boards 162 through 171. We had 16 reviewers. Again, this is outside of the SPC, but a lot of the SPC reviewers participated in this project. Again, they had a really short sort of 10-day window to review these abstracts. And so each presentation had at least 2 reviewers look at it to get accepted to today's meeting. So thank you to the reviewers if you're here in the audience. And then again, graduate student mentors. And so when the students are on site here, we have graduate student programs, mentors. I think Andrew's in the audience here. And so thank you guys for making this program so great. Yes, Rania, thank you very much. And lastly, nothing works at AMIA without AMIA staff. So really big hand to Dasha, who is sort of our right-hand lady, who makes all of these things work out really well. Rochelle is here from Vanderbilt. Is Rochelle in the room? I haven't run into Rochelle yet. So Rochelle actually helps coordinate a lot of the activities for the students. And so aside from this high school student program, there's other activities that the students are involved with during the AMIA session. Lastly, I want to thank the financial support from the National Library of Medicine. Again, there's funding involved to bring the students here as well as our high school student mentors to the program. And so we'll start with our first talk. Is it Carolyn? Are you up first? So this is Carolyn Wang. She will be discussing leveraging electronic medical records to identify clinical features associated with preterm birth.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Wang. I'm a senior at Gunn High School. This summer, I interned at the University of California, San Francisco Institute for Computational Health Sciences with the following individuals: Dr. D. Kosti, Dr. Tulbute, and Dr. Marina Sirota. And as mentioned, my study is leveraging electronic medical records to identify clinical features associated with preterm birth. Now, just to give some, some of the slides are missing for some reason, but I'm just going to keep talking. So, preterm delivery is defined as the delivery of a newborn child before 37 weeks of gestation. It affects around 10% of women in the United States and is the leading cause of death in children under 5 years old. Moreover, it's also the cause of numerous developmental complications and disabilities. So it's a pretty big problem that affects a lot of people. Unfortunately, only 50% of preterm birth have a clear known cause, so it's very difficult for us to predict and explain this phenomena to many pregnant women. Fortunately, electronic medical records, or EMR, give us a unique opportunity to study pregnancy outcomes by taking a very holistic view of many women at the same time. So as you probably know, an EMR is essentially the digital version of a paper chart that contains all the patient's medical records. This includes information such as de-identified patient ID and the date of the encounter, but also information such as the medical history of the patient, the diagnoses, lab tested medication that the hospital records during the patient's stay, and all this information is sorted under an ICD-10 code. Essentially, this is a billing code for an insurance company. And this is really a great feature of EMR because it allows us to take a very comprehensive view of patients. And it also allows us to group similar diagnoses. So for instance, some patients may have one diagnosis of hypertension. Some patients may have the diagnosis of hypertension in the second trimester. With an ICD-10 code, we can look at those two at the same time and analyze them as one. There are 3 goals for the study. The first is to confirm known risk factors of preterm birth. Essentially, this is taking what we already know about preterm birth and comparing it with the data that we have. Next, we want to identify new risk factors. So we can look at the features of women who deliver preterm and women who deliver term and check out their similarities and differences to see if that tells us anything. And finally, in the future, we hope to develop a machine learning approach to predict preterm delivery. This way, we'll be able to identify women at risk and provide them the extra care and supervision they need. Of course, this is a very large goal, and we hope to accomplish it at some point. Right, so there are several steps in building a pregnancy timeline, which is one of the first objectives that we have to accomplish. Essentially, if we have a pregnancy timeline, we're able to track the course of each patient's pregnancy and see what happens before, after, and during the pregnancy itself. First, we establish a date of delivery. Second, we establish the earliest known date of the pregnancy. Note that this might not actually be the start of the pregnancy itself, but it's the first date where the hospital becomes aware that the woman is pregnant. So there are three parts to a pregnancy timeline. The first is everything that happens before the pregnancy itself. This includes information such as medical history given by the patient or prior records in the system for this patient in particular. There are also patient characteristics that we look at, such as race, age, and BMI. These are also other factors that influence preterm delivery. The next part that we look at is what actually happens during the pregnancy itself. This includes diagnoses that the hospital records for the patient. And finally, we can take a cumulative view of what happened. So from the beginning of the medical history all the way to the date of delivery, we see information such as medication and lab tests. For the lab test, what's particularly important is if these values for preterm and term women are marked abnormal or normal. So if you later on in the presentation, you'll see the colors red, blue, and yellow being used to indicate the part of the timeline on which the results fall. The experimental design is as follows. We started out with 13,997 patients who delivered term and 1,394 patients who delivered preterm at the UCSF hospital. Note that this actually mirrors the 10% ratio that we see worldwide. Next, we established timelines for as many as we could, and then we used the set of the following criteria to filter out patients. First, we removed all irregular records. In some of these cases, the hospital mistakenly inputs the data of the child, but in other cases, we were not exactly sure why. But in any case, we removed these irregular records where the first known date of the pregnancy is after the delivery date, when the patient is identified as male, or the age falls outside of the 15 to 6-year-old range. Right, but that doesn't make any sense. Next, we remove all the records of women who deliver twins or triplets, because that can be a confounding factor. We only want to understand what may prompt the preterm delivery of a single live-born child. And finally, we remove the records of women who only had one trimester's worth of data, because we want to take a more comprehensive view of the whole pregnancy and ensure that we have enough information to look at. That gives us 668 patients who delivered preterm and 7,410 patients who delivered term. Now moving on to the results. The first part we look at is demographic information. There are two important factors to this. There's race and there's age. For race, we were able to confirm many of the known observations about women who deliver preterm. So using a 2 proportion z-test, we were able to see that the proportion of Asian women who deliver preterm is significantly lower than the proportion of Asian women who deliver term. We were also able to see that African American women generally delivered at higher rates of preterm than the other races. Moreover, we also looked at age, and there's a common conception in age that either women who are extremely young or extremely old tend to deliver preterm more often, but we see that the distributions are more or less the same, and to look at the odds ratio test and the p-values obtained, there's no evidence that indicates that there's a significant amount of women who are 15 to 20 or 40 and over who deliver preterm more often. So yeah, there isn't any trend indicated by this data. Next, we looked at the medical history of the patient. So prior records that they may have had in the system or information they may have disclosed to the hospital. So essentially the graphs are 95% confidence intervals obtained from Fisher tests, and the boxes represent how precise the data is. For the known risk factors that we were able to confirm, we saw that women with a prior history of preterm delivery, obesity, diabetes, or hypertension generally delivered preterm more often. Again, this is what we know, and we are able to confirm these observations. Moreover, however, we also discovered several novel associations that we want to explore. For instance, we saw that anxiety, depression, and hypothyroidism were more common among women who delivered preterm. It's generally known that women who experience more stress during the pregnancy tend to deliver preterm more often, but stress is often an arbitrary and hard to determine factor. Here we see a clear medical indication that a mood disorder may affect the outcome of the pregnancy, and we think these factors are worthy of further consideration. Next, we looked at lab tests. Now, there are two lab tests I'd like to examine. The first category of lab test involves protein. So, as we see from the odds ratio test, the level of protein in women who delivered preterm was significantly higher than the level of protein in women who delivered term. This is something that indicates preeclampsia, where certain failures of the kidney will lead to this phenomena happening. And preeclampsia is one of the known factors that is associated with preterm birth. Furthermore, what we also see is that when we run lab tests regarding hemoglobin and hematocrit on women who deliver preterm and term, women who deliver preterm often fall under that normal range. So they have significantly lower levels of red blood cells. This is something that may signify anemia, which is suspected to be a risk factor but not necessarily confirmed. So just to summarize the results, we see that race plays an important association with preterm birth, but age doesn't necessarily have as strong of a connection. Moreover, we are able to confirm known and suspected risk factors such as a history of preterm delivery, hypertension, preeclampsia, obesity, and diabetes. In the future, potential novel associations to explore include anxiety, depression, other mood disorders, hypothyroidism, and anemia. Another thing that we took away from the study was that we can use lab tests to measure and identify some of these factors. So lab tests administered to all pregnant women may be able to identify one who are at risk of delivering preterm because they can identify some of the associations mentioned above. In the future, we hope to explore these new variables, but also examine different types of preterm birth, so essentially spontaneous versus induced preterm birth. We also hope to use the timelines that we created to do a longitudinal analysis of the pregnancy outcomes. And finally, the big goal is to use predictive modeling to identify women at risk. If they match many of the features that we identify, hopefully we can provide the extra supervision that would be warranted in a woman who delivered preterm. I would like to thank the following individuals for working with me, and the University of California, San Francisco for supporting my research. Thank you for listening, and I'm now open to questions and other clarifications.
Any questions?
Do we dare? Carolyn from Johns Hopkins, I just want to congratulate you on a great talk. And we wish some of our regular graduate students would have this high quality. So thank you very much.
All right, well, seeing none, we'll keep moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.